Anne of Windy Poplars, Chapter 13. Ah, when you've been old and bedridden as long as me, you'll have more sympathy, whined Mrs. Gibson. Please don't think I'm lacking in sympathy, Mrs. Gibson, said Anne, who after a half an hour's vain effort felt like wringing Mrs. Gibson's neck. Nothing but poor Pauline's pleading eyes in the background kept her from giving up in despair and going home. I assure you, you won't be lonely and neglected. I will be here all day and see that you lack nothing in any way. Oh, I know I'm of no use to anyone, said Mrs. Gibson, apropos of nothing that had been said. You don't need to rub that in, Miss Shirley. I'm ready to go any time. Pauline can gad round all she wants to, then. I won't be here to feel neglected. None of the young people of today have any sense. Giddy. Very giddy. Anne didn't know whether it was Pauline or herself who was the giddy young person without sense, but she tried the last shot in her locker. Well, you know, Mrs. Gibson, people will talk so terribly if Pauline doesn't go to her cousin's silver wedding. Talk, said Mrs. Gibson sharply. What will they talk about? Dear Mrs. Gibson, may I be forgiven the adjective, thought Anne. In your long life, you have learned, I know, just what idle tongues can say. You needn't be casting my age up to me, snapped Mrs. Gibson, and I don't need to be told it's a censorious world. Too well, I know it. And I don't need to be told that this town is full of tattling toads neither. But I dunno's I fancy them jabbering about me, saying, I suppose, that I'm an old tyrant. I ain't stopping Pauline from going. Didn't I leave it to her conscience? So few people will believe that, said Anne, carefully sorrowful. Mrs. Gibson sucked a peppermint lozenge fiercely for a minute or two, and then she said, I hear there's mumps at White Sands. Ma dear, you know I've had the mumps. There's folks that can take them twice. You'd be just the one to take them twice, Pauline. You always took everything that came around. The nights I've sat up with you, not expecting you'd see the morning. Ah me, a mother's sacrifices ain't long remembered. Besides, how would you get to White Sands? You ain't been on a train for years. And there ain't any train back Saturday night. She could go on the Saturday morning train, said Anne, and I'm sure Mr. James Gregor will bring her back. I've never liked Jim Gregor. His mother was a tarbush. He is taking his double-seated buggy and going down Friday, or else he would take her down too. But she'll be quite safe on the train, Mrs. Gibson. Just a step on at Summerside and a step off at White Sands. No changing. There's something behind all this, said Mrs. Gibson suspiciously. Why are you so set on her going, Miss Shirley? Just tell me that. Anne smiled into the beady-eyed face. Because I think Pauline is a good, kind daughter to you, Mrs. Gibson, and needs a day off now and then, just as everybody does. Most people found it hard to resist Anne's smile. Either that or the fear of gossip vanquished Mrs. Gibson. I suppose it never occurs to anyone I'd like a day off from this wheelchair if I could get it, but I can't. I just have to bear my affliction patiently. Well, if she must go, she must. She's always been one to get her own way. If she catches mumps or gets poisoned by strange mosquitoes, don't blame me for it. I'll have to get along as best I can. Oh, I suppose you'll be here, but you ain't used to my ways as Pauline is. I suppose I can stand it for one day. If I can't, well, I've been living on borrowed time many's the year now, so what's the difference? Not a gracious assent by any means, but still an assent. Anne, in her relief and gratitude, found herself doing something she could never have imagined herself doing. She bent over and kissed Mrs. Gibson's leathery cheek. Thank you, she said. Never mind your wheedling ways, said Mrs. Gibson. Have a peppermint. How can I ever thank you, Miss Shirley, said Pauline, as she went a little way down the street with Anne. By going to White Sands with a light heart and enjoying every minute of the time. Oh, I'll do that. You don't know what this means to me, Miss Shirley. It's not only Louisa I want to see. The old Luckley place next to her home is going to be sold, and I did so want to see it once more before it passed into the hands of strangers. Mary Luckley, she's Mrs. Howard Fleming now, and lives out west, was my dearest friend when I was a girl. We were like sisters. I used to be at the Luckley place so much, and I loved it so. I've often dreamed of going back. Ma says I'm getting too old to dream. Do you think I am, Miss Shirley? Nobody is ever too old to dream, and dreams never grow old. I'm so glad to hear you say that. Oh, Miss Shirley, to think of seeing the Gulf again. I haven't seen it for 15 years. The harbor is beautiful, but it isn't the Gulf. I feel as if I was walking on air, and I owe it all to you. It was just because Ma likes you she let me go. You've made me happy. You're always making people happy. Why, whenever you come into the room, Miss Shirley, the people in it feel happier. That's the very nicest compliment I've ever had paid me, Pauline. There's just one thing, Miss Shirley. I've nothing to wear but my old black taffeta. It's too gloomy to wear for a wedding, isn't it? And it's too big for me since I got thin. You see, it's 6 years since I got it. We must try and induce your mother to let you have a new dress, said Anne hopefully. But that proved to be beyond her powers. Mrs. Gibson was adamant. Pauline's black taffeta was plenty good for Louisa Hilton's wedding. I paid $2 a yard for it 6 years ago, and 3 to Jane Sharp for making it. Jane was a good dressmaker. Her mother was a Smiley. The idea of you wanting something light, Pauline Gibson. She'd go dressed in scarlet from head to foot, that one, if she was let, Miss Shirley. She's just waiting till I'm dead to do it. Ah, well, you'll soon be shut of the trouble I am to you, Pauline. Then you can dress as gay and giddy as you like. But as long as I'm alive, you'll be decent. And what's the matter with your hat? It's time you wore a bonnet anyhow. Poor Pauline had a lively horror of having to wear a bonnet. She would wear her old hat for the rest of her life before she would do that. I'm just going to be glad inside and forget all about my clothes, she told Anne, when they went out to the garden to pick a bouquet of June lilies and bleeding heart for the widows. I've a plan, said Anne with a cautious glance to make sure Mrs. Gibson couldn't hear her, though she was watching from the sitting-room window. You know that silver and grey poplin of mine? I'm going to lend you that for the wedding. Pauline dropped the basket of flowers in her agitation, making a pool of pink and white sweetness at Anne's feet. Oh, my dear, I couldn't. Ma wouldn't let me. She wouldn't know a thing about it. Listen. Saturday morning you'll put it on under your black taffeta. I know it will fit you. It's a little long, but I'll run some tucks in it tomorrow. Tucks are fashionable now. It's collarless, with elbow sleeves, so no one will suspect. As soon as you get to Gull Cove, take off the taffeta. When the day is over, you can leave the poplin at Gull Cove, and I can get it the next weekend I'm home. But wouldn't it be too young for me? Not a bit of it. Any age can wear grey. Do you think it would be right to deceive Ma? Faltered Pauline. In this case, entirely right, said Anne shamelessly. You know, Pauline, it would never do to wear a black dress to a wedding. It might bring the bride bad luck. Oh, I wouldn't do that for anything. And of course it won't hurt Ma. I do hope she'll get through Saturday all right. I'm afraid she won't eat a bite when I'm away. She didn't the time I went to Cousin Matilda's funeral. Miss Prouty told me she didn't. Miss Prouty stayed with her. She was so provoked at Cousin Matilda for dying. Ma, I mean. She'll eat. I'll see to that. I know you have a great knack of managing her, conceded Pauline, and you won't forget to give her medicine at the regular times, will you, dear? Oh, perhaps I oughtn't go after all. You've been out there long enough to pick 40 bouquets, said Mrs. Gibson irately. I don't know what the widows want of your flowers. They've plenty of their own. I'd go a long time without flowers if I waited for Rebecca Dew to send me any. I'm dying for a drink of water, but then I'm of no consequence. Friday night, Pauline telephoned Anne in terrible agitation. She had a sore throat, and did Miss Shirley think it could possibly be the mumps? Anne ran down to reassure her, taking the gray poplin in a brown paper parcel. She hid it in the lilac bush, and late that night, Pauline, in a cold perspiration, managed to smuggle it upstairs to the little room where she'd kept her clothes and dressed, though she was never permitted to sleep there. Pauline was not quite easy about the dress. Perhaps her sore throat was a judgment on her for deception. But she couldn't go to Louisa's silver wedding in that dreadful old black taffeta. She simply couldn't. Saturday morning, Anne was at the Gibson house bright and early. Anne always looked her best on a sparkling summer morning such as this. She seemed to sparkle with it, and she moved through the golden air like a slender figure on a Grecian urn. The dullest room sparkled, too, lived when she came into it. "Walking as if you owned the earth," commented Mrs. Gibson sarcastically. "So I do," said Anne gaily. "Ah, you're very young," said Mrs. Gibson maddeningly. "I withhold not my heart from any joy," quoted Anne. "That is Bible authority for you, Mrs. Gibson." "I withhold not my heart from any joy," quoted Anne. "That is Bible authority for you, Mrs. Gibson." "Man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. That's in the Bible, too," retorted Mrs. Gibson. The fact that she so neatly countered Miss Shirley, B.A., put her in a comparatively good humor. "I was never one to flatter, Miss Shirley, but that chip hat of yours with the blue flower kind of sets you. Your hair don't look so red under it, seems to me. Don't you admire a fresh young girl like this, Pauline? Wouldn't you like to be a fresh young girl yourself, Pauline?" Pauline was too happy and excited to want to be anyone but herself just then. Anne went to the upstairs room with her to help her dress. "It's so lovely to think of all the pleasant things that must happen today, Miss Shirley. My throat is quite well, and Ma is in such a good humor. You mightn't think so. I know because she's talking, even if she is sarcastic. If she was mad or riled, she'd be sulking. I've peeled the potatoes and the steak is in the icebox, and Ma's blancmange is down cellar. There is canned chicken for supper and a sponge cake in the pantry. I'm just on tenterhooks, Ma'll change your mind yet. Oh, I couldn't bear it if she did. Oh, Miss Shirley, do you think I'd better wear that gray dress? Really?" "Put it on," Anne said in her best school-teacherish manner. Pauline obeyed and emerged a transformed Pauline. The gray dress fitted her beautifully. It was collarless and had dainty lace ruffles in the elbow sleeves. When Anne had done her hair, Pauline hardly knew herself. "I hate to cover it up with that horrid old black taffeta, Miss Shirley." But it had to be. The taffeta covered it securely. The old hat went on, but it would be taken off too when she got to Louisa's. And Pauline had a new pair of shoes. Mrs. Gibson had actually allowed her to get a new pair of shoes, though she thought the heels scandalous high. "I'll make quite a sensation going away on the train, alone. I hope people won't think it's a death. I wouldn't want Louisa's silver wedding to be connected in any way with the thought of death. Oh, perfume! Miss Shirley, apple blossom! Isn't that lovely? Just a whiff. So ladylike, I always think. Ma won't let me buy any. Oh, Miss Shirley, you won't forget to feed my dog, will you? I've left his bones in the pantry in the covered dish. I do hope," dropping her voice to a shamed whisper, "that he won't misbehave in the house while you're here." Pauline had to pass her mother's inspection before leaving. Excitement over her outing and guilt in regard to the hidden poplin combined to give her a very unusual flush. Miss Gibson gazed at her discontentedly. "Oh me, oh my, going to London to look at the Queen, are we? You've got too much colour. People will think you're painted. You're sure you ain't?" "Oh, no, Ma, no," in shocked tones. "Mind your manners now, and when you set down, cross your ankles decently. Mind you don't set in a draught or talk too much." "I won't, Ma," promised Pauline earnestly, with a nervous glance at the clock. "I'm sending Louisa a bottle of my sarsaparilla wine to drink the toasts in. I never cared for Louisa, but her mother was a tackleberry. Mind you bring her back the bottle, and don't let her give you a kitten. Louisa's always giving people kittens." "I won't, Ma." "You sure you didn't leave the soap in the water?" "Quite sure, Ma," with another anguished glance at the clock. Are your shoelaces tied? Yes, Ma. You don't smell respectable. Drenched in scent. Oh, no, Ma dear, just a little. The tiniest bit. I said drenched, and I mean drenched. There isn't a rip under your arm, is there? Oh, no, Ma. Let me see, inexorably. Pauline quaked. Suppose the skirt of the gray dress showed when she lifted her arms.